Okay. All right, now it is time for the heart of our service, our message, and we are so blessed today to have with us our senior minister, Reverend Cathy Hough.
Thank you. I don't know whether I'm supposed to give this talk today. First, it blew off the table, and all the pages were all over the sanctuary, and Susanna and Joe were running to catch them. Then I spilled tea on it. But just imagine, I'm just visualizing it surrounded with gold gilt, and it is absolutely perfect. Good morning. I'm glad to see all of you brave souls who ventured out into the blizzard weather. I think there's a phrase I left behind in California that I had to resurrect yesterday, and that phrase was, "Brr, I'm cold." I couldn't believe it. But here we are in December, the month where the year's journey comes to an end and another cycle begins. And with each solstice comes a stillness. We have a few days pause between the dwindling light and the lengthening days to follow, or vice versa in the southern hemisphere. This is the time to sit and just be with ourselves, right where we are, listening to that still small voice as it speaks, and just giving ourselves over to the mystery. Our theme for December is the journey of becoming. And our topic this week is surrender is action. Surrender is action. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I think of the word surrender, this vision immediately comes to mind. I see little Dorothy and her 3 faithful companions, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and of course Toto. And I see them cowering in fear outside of the gates of the Emerald City, as above them the Wicked Witch is cackling and soaring on her broom, and the smoke trails from her broom right across the sky in menacing letters, "Surrender, Dorothy." Now, I remember as a little girl being absolutely terrified, that scene and the flying monkeys, okay? But I felt shivers, I remember it, I'm feeling them right now, shivers running up and down my spine when I was watching that scene for the first time. And I imagine that my negative connotations around the word surrender began in that very moment. But you might have already guessed, that's not the type of surrender I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about that kind of surrender the witch was demanding of Dorothy. That type of surrender implies submitting out of fear to someone or something that is threatening you. And in Dorothy's case, she would have had to give up her power, which was symbolized by the ruby slippers. And if she gave up her power, she also gave up any chance of ever returning home, which was her greatest desire. But in our teaching, the idea of surrender no way implies giving control of your life over to another person, organization, or a set of ideas. By surrendering, we're talking about trusting the forces and principles that are always in play, always working. That's how our universe proceeds. And rather than being disempowering, we talk about surrender as a very deeply empowering spiritual practice. Surrender is an active verb. It requires a choice to move from trying to control circumstances to recognizing and relaxing into the order of the divine. So in truth, we're surrendering not to chaos, but to divine order. It's that understanding that as we develop and we mature spiritually, we move through stages of consciousness. Most of us do anyway. We all do. Some of us a little slower. But we move from a state of victimhood in which we first believe that the universe is happening, life is just happening to us. And then we come into that stage where we recognize that we are co-creators and that life is happening for us. And then, if we're lucky, we move up to the understanding that we are actually channels for spirit and that life is happening through us. And lastly, we move to the highest state of consciousness in which we let go of all sense of separation and enter into a state of conscious union. That's the state in which we truly understand the Sanskrit saying, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. Or if you want to personalize it, I am that. That is when that expression is understood, and we know that it is describing the relationship between the individual and God. I am that. Whoops. Okay, thank you, Casey. Thank you, everybody. Things are happening. Wind is blowing. All right. Thank you so much. A couple of weeks ago, Rabbi Rachel reminded us of the Hanukkah story, which I will briefly review. After their victory over the Greeks, the Maccabees went to work. They hard at work restoring and rededicating their temple. But they realized that their holy lamp had only enough oil for one day. However, they lit the oil, and the oil that was only supposed to burn for one night burned brightly for 8 full days. And this was enough time for the new oil to be consecrated for the temple. And of course, this miracle inspired the Festival of Lights that we now refer to as Hanukkah, which celebrates the 8 days that the oil continued to burn brightly and proclaims it as a miracle. Now, how does this story fit in with surrendering as a spiritual practice? Well, the Jews rebuilding their temple accepted that it would only last for one day, but they lit the lamp anyway. Rather than trying to stretch out the oil or otherwise impose their will or give up in resignation, they let go. They accepted the reality of the situation and miraculously found that they had everything they needed. You might ask then, is surrendering the same as having faith? Yeah, I think that the act of surrender is the act of ultimate faith. The Jews weren't denying their situation, nor were they resigned to it. They were taking an action of faith when they lit that oil, which led to the principle of abundance being activated. They were proving the principle that when we surrender to the presence and power of divine love within, anything is possible. When we listen for and surrender to the inner guidance, we receive exactly what we need. And following that inner guidance that we do receive with faith, rather than questioning or resisting it, moves us to powerful and healing action. And the good news is that we forget sometimes is that the healing actions that we take on our behalf must extend themselves and serve all humanity and the greater good. Because the inner is the outer, and this is what this oneness stuff that we're talking about is all about. What we do affects others. In Secrets of Divine Love, the author A. Helwa says this: when we surrender to God, we change the flow of intention and energy behind our actions. We don't act from fear of loss or from poverty, but from a place of trust in God. The concept of surrender is beautifully described in Taoism as Wei Wu Wei, meaning do without doing. When we surrender to God, we are like a grain of sand surrendering to become the mountain, or we're like a drop of rain surrendering to become the entire ocean. So wait, does surrender then mean just doing nothing? Or does it mean stopping the frenetic attempts to control situations and focusing instead our attention on the real, the eternal, the changeless nature of spirit, where creation and restoration and renewal happen? Sometimes just sitting in stillness and breathing is the greatest action we can take in the moment. The Bhagavad Gita tells us that those who see action in inaction and those who see inaction in action are truly wise among humans. So earlier on yesterday, when I was writing this talk, I came to a point where, I knew the essence of the message I wanted to convey, but the words weren't coming, the flow was broken, I was getting really irritated. So this is what I did. I stopped, I made a cup of tea, I petted my dogs, I said a brief prayer, and I returned to my work. I did that all in that order. Bum, 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 bum. Tea, dogs, prayer. Get back to your computer. And lo and behold, when I returned to the keyboard, the next sentence came through with ease and the flow resumed. One of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, said, "Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you." I love that. And in that moment, it was perfect truth. I recognized my frustration. And for me, swearing out loud is always a good clue. Good clue. And I'm swearing, and boy, I can come up with some combinations that are unbelievable. Okay, so I recognized my frustration, and I chose first to close my hugely potty mouth, and then I took my hands off the steering wheel, or in this case, the computer keyboard, and stood up and walked away. A pause, a refocusing, a deep breath, a remembering. Sometimes surrendering just involves a brief moment in time, and my world is made right once again. Eckhart Tolle advises, if you were stuck in the mud somewhere, you wouldn't say, "Okay, I resign myself to being stuck in the mud." Resignation is not surrender. You don't need to accept an undesirable or unpleasant life situation. Nor do you need to deceive yourselves and say that there's nothing wrong with being stuck in the mud. No, Eckhart says, you recognize fully that you want to get out of it. You then, he says, narrow your attention down to the present moment without mentally labeling it in any way. This means there is no judgment of the now. This means I cannot swear out loud. I just thought of that. Anyway, he says means there is no judgment of the now. Therefore, there is no resistance, no emotional negativity. He goes on to say, you accept the isness of the moment. Then you take action and do all you can to get out of the mud. Now granted, sometimes I am much better accepting the isness of the moment. And if I were better, I would skip altogether the swearing out loud step. And I would have that realization that just getting up and moving toward what appears to be mindless action will be my greatest step in reaching solution. And Tolle says also, let me give you a visual analogy to illustrate the point of surrender. You are walking along a path at night surrounded by a thick fog, but you have a powerful flashlight that cuts through the fog and creates a narrow, clear space in front of you. The fog is your life, which includes past and future. The flashlight is your conscious presence, and the clear space is the now. In that clear space of the now moment, we're able to engage in the science of mind principle that we call practicing the presence of oneness and love and creation to become aware of the experience of the one infinite reality. That's our goal. The practice of the presence is engaging in formal, disciplined methodologies that quiet the mind and body and open awareness. Now don't get scared, because is my petting the dogs a formal, disciplined methodology? Yeah, in my world it is. And if you want to read up on your research, you'll know that stroking in your animal's fur lowers your blood pressure and relieves anxiety. It's also an act that unleashes some love, which can't help but be healing and regenerating, in this example, for both me and the dogs. So yeah, sitting there and stroking my dog's fur is a disciplined methodology, a formal, disciplined methodology. Yay. And we all can remember and think about Thich Nhat Hanh, who tells us that making a cup of tea and drinking it slowly and with gratitude is a strongly recommended spiritual practice. And yeah, I remembered to throw in the prayer on top of it. The dogs and the tea came first, but the prayer followed. And that was the icing on the cake that enabled me to move forward in my work. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, says this: in transforming energy into power, we are uniting an invisible essence with an invisible law, which is the way the universe works. If we identify ourselves with the source, then our word establishes eternal harmony, transforms everything, and rearranges everything to our benefit. It is an act of complete surrender of the human to the divine, without the loss of the human, and a complete inflowing of the divine into the human. You know, when we live in alignment with our science of mind principles, and these principles become evident in the way that we do engage in the present moment, we can't help but become more congruent in our thoughts and our words and our behaviors. Because when we surrender, we are inviting God's presence to make itself known more deeply to us. When we become willing to become still and listen long enough, we'll hear the voice of the heart. We'll be guided to right action. Sufi master Llewellyn Vaughan Lee writes, "The heart of the human being opens, and we learn to see with the eye of the heart and listen with the ear of the heart. This is something we have forgotten. It is a great mystery of being human. Our hearts can be opened." But we have to be willing to be still long enough to wait and to move away from the surface of our life. In science of mind lingo, it is the stillness that enables us to move away from the relative or the conditions that appear to be plaguing us in the moment, and move toward the absolute, where spirit is fully present and everything is possible. That's where creation happens. Dr. Holmes says in the Science of Mind text, our mind should swing from inspiration to action, from contemplation to accomplishment, and from prayer to performance. That would be a well-balanced existence. And later on in the text, he quotes one of his most influential teachers, Judge Thomas Troward, who said, "We enter the absolute in such a degree as we withdraw from the relative, and we withdraw from the relative in such a degree as we enter the absolute." Surrender is the pathway we take to reach the absolute. In a famous ancient Sufi tale, it is said that when Genghis Khan invaded Turkestan, his Mongol soldiers stopped at the village of Rigara, which was about 20 miles from Bukhara. All right, by this time, most of the villagers had fled in terror, but one man was found working peacefully at his loom. And an officer was stunned by this and immediately went to Genghis Khan and reported this unusual occurrence. And Genghis Khan said, "Bring me this man." And when the man was brought in front of Genghis Khan, he was asked through an interpreter why he had not fled in terror like the other villagers. The weaver simply replied, "My outer attention was on my work, and my inner attention was on God. I had no time to notice what was happening in the world around me." Genghis Khan was so impressed with this man's reply and with the peace and the tranquility the weaver was showing that he ordered his soldiers to leave the village in peace. And he asked the weaver to go on with him, to accompany him to Bukhara, and to advise him about whom he could trust. Unlike the people of the other cities, which Genghis Khan captured, the inhabitants of Bukhara were not massacred. My outer attention was on my work, and my inner attention was on God. How powerful is that example of perfect surrender? If you just change the tense from past to present, it becomes a great affirmation. My outer attention is on my work, and my inner attention is on God. Surrendering is letting go of the reins and laying all the burdens of life on the altar of divine love. It's moving to a place where we can feel the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of the heart, where we can allow the highest and best good to come forward. The Reverend Roger Teal reminds us that the love that is God is an ember in each of us that will never go out. It awaits the surrendering of aggressive forcing, the releasing of fear and neediness, along with the fresh air of the open heart, so that it may be kindled into an amazing energy for good. And every day we get a new opportunity. We get actually endless, unlimited opportunities to open our hearts and cultivate that amazing energy for good that accompanies the willingness to let go and let God. Medical intuitive Carolyn Mize says, "I'll tell you what's crazy. Holding on to pain and trauma that should have long ago been healed or released. Maintaining your patterns of stress that only serve to break down your health. Continuing behavioral patterns that are fundamentally destructive. That's crazy. Surrendering your problems in faith to the divine is not crazy. It's cosmic liberation. So set your soul free. Pray like you have nothing to lose except your fear." So we surrender in many ways. We surrender through our conscious acts of affirmation and prayer. We surrender when we decide to forgive ourselves and forgive everybody else. We surrender when we make stillness and breath work a part of our daily practice. In Zen Buddhism, they talk a lot about having a beginner's mind, and Zen practitioners advise that the mind should be like an empty rice bowl. Because if it's already full, the universe can't add to it, and if it's empty, it has room to receive. Lucky for me, the older I get, it's easier to have a mind that is like an empty rice bowl, even if it is because I have a serious case of CRS disease. CRS? What is that? Can't remember stuff. I'm at the lectern here. Can't remember stuff. So it becomes easier to live in the now moment, as Eckhart Tolle is always telling us to do, because all I can remember is the now moment. So the good news is that I remain teachable and open to receiving insight. Because in reality, that's what surrender is. It's the process of emptying the mind. And I'm getting really good at that. But seriously, folks, there is something inside us that always knows what to do, or what to say, or what to write, or who to forgive, or who to let go of. It knows. And when we consciously step back, we are creating the space for Spirit to step forward and lead the way. In the words of Reverend Scott Aubrey, surrender means the decision to stop fighting the world and start loving it instead. It is a liberation from pain and struggle. We put down our armor and discover the strength of our God self. And Dr. Holmes teaches that there is a pattern of God behind our personality, seeking unique expression through it. And to this we should surrender everything we are. For this surrender will not lead us away from reality. It is not an escape, but a revelation and an instrumentation of something greater than we appear to be. As we come to surrender all littleness and all fear and doubt, that great river of life flowing from the mind of God will renew our vigor, remake our strength, ennoble our being, heal our bodies, and bring peace to our hearts. And what more could we want? And so it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Cathy. That was fantastic. Just what I needed to hear. I don't know about you all, but that was lovely.